From the DNA Company, this is the Unpilled Podcast with your host, Kashif Khan.
Kashif Khan here, CEO of the DNA Company, and thank you for joining us to listen in on diving deep into DNA and trying to understand this thing that we've thought was going to be this jewel of information that was going to change everything. Why hasn't it touched all of us yet? And it's starting to get there. And we're asking ourselves questions that are general questions, like one we're going to explore today, genetically blessed. I'm a supermodel. How did I get there? And we look at things like, somebody's physique or their mental capacity or their ability to perform and wonder, why is it different? And up until recently, the answers really weren't there. We've been studying genetics for decades now, but we went in the wrong direction. We were looking for only solving genetic problems. I was born with something. How do I fix it? Meanwhile, that's a very small part of what actually touches all of us and the things we need to deal with. And this is where, starting with the thing I just said, let's actually talk to a supermodel. In fact, Canada's first supermodel, arguably the greatest ever. I'm willing to say that. Monika Schnarre is joining us today, and we're very lucky to have her with us. And let's ask that question. Let's figure out, is there anything in the genome that speaks to profession, achievement, physique? It's not just about that. It's also the ability to perform. How did Monika get there? So Monika, first of all, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
And we were, a little while ago, just a few days ago, we actually explored your DNA.
Yes.
And it was pretty interesting because prior to this, we were able to dive deep, and there's some things that you kind of knew were going on, but didn't know why. And there's some things that were like, oh, I didn't even know that. And blew your mind a little bit. So, and the first thing, like, people they ask us about athletes, they ask us about executives, they ask us about people in your professional, models, actors, like, is it like a genetic lottery? How did I get there? Right? And there's something to be said about that. And we dove into your hormones, and that really pointed to a lot, right? And I remember before speaking, we said that there's things that people with sort of this physique, like, what does it take to walk down the runway? Tall, slender, probably toned muscle, right? If we talk about it, at the biochemistry level, I said, that's often tied to fertility issues. And that's where you kind of paused. And what did you tell me?
Well, it was really interesting what you said about a lot of women in my profession are probably higher on the testosterone level.
Yes.
And that it's tied to infertility. And I actually struggled for years. My husband and I tried for 6 years to get pregnant and lost pregnancies. And so it was really fascinating to me. And I said to you, I could have saved $30,000 in IVF treatments. And you said, it may be, but it's fascinating to me how, on one hand, of course, I feel so blessed, and I haven't always struggled with my weight, but then on the other hand, there are these other issues when you have high testosterone levels that you might be athletic and you might be able to get ripped quicker, but you also maybe have fertility issues. So that was really interesting to me.
And that's the trade-off where, people wonder what determines our body shape, style, our ability to retain fat or muscle, our ability to get rid of fat or muscle.
Mm-hmm.
It's primarily hormonally driven. Yes, there's food and there's lifestyle and things that can augment that somewhat, but that core foundation of what do I look like,
Mm-hmm.
that's hormonal. And tied to what other pros or cons come with any body type, there's also healthcare implications, being those same hormones that drive what do I look like, drive what's going on inside. And this is why we're able to say that just by looking at you, what we refer to as androgenized. It doesn't mean that you only produce testosterone. Everybody goes through the same process. You produce progesterone, which converts to testosterone, which converts to estrogen. What you do in that process, that's a gamble. There's so many different directions, so many versions, and so it's almost, call it infinite. And this is where we started. It started as this infinite. There's so many different people. How do we treat them? And where we landed was truly remarkable. We didn't expect this. There's actually 6 different types of women.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, hormonally, there's 6 women, and nobody, we even didn't know that, right? And we only know that because we spent so much time working with female hormone issues that we started to see the trend that over and over and over again, women fell into one of 6 buckets. So we went from this thing that was not understood to like infinite possibilities to bringing it right back down to you fit in one of 6 buckets. And this is why we're able to say, you look like this, you probably had fertility issues because the things are connected in that bucket. But there's other issues that come along with it, like for example, hair loss, right? The estrogen dominant woman, not not what you're experiencing, what gives you that fit physique, ability to put on muscle and have that 6-pack if you want. But you don't have necessarily the estrogens to have that beautiful flowing hair, which somehow you manage to make it work, right? But it, as you said, and we were talking last week, that you currently experience some issues with that.
So yeah, recently I've been, losing my hair, and I mean, it doesn't look like it when you see me, but I had like double the amount, and I was just I was really concerned about it, and I didn't really think much more than that. It was my age. I didn't think,
right,
hormonally or my DNA. I didn't think any of that had anything to do with it, or the things we've talked about on the phone. And so it's been really enlightening in that regard.
And it's hard if you don't know why it's happening, you don't know how to fix it, right? And this is where, when we talked about these 6 different profiles, it's rooted in 3 things. It's first of all hormone dominance. Am I estrogen dominant or testosterone like yourself, or am I I'm somewhat in the middle? Then there's estrogen toxicity. Do I produce a clean estrogen or is it toxic? And then there's also testosterone toxicity. It could be a very clean testosterone. It could be what's called DHT, this potent manly man version, which I would assume a lot of supermodels have, which is why they have skin issues and hair issues, but they have the perfect slender figure. Then there's the clearance. So between those 3 things, we can identify, firstly, am I estrogen or testosterone dominant? What do I kind of look like? Then is it, am I producing a toxic byproduct or not, a not so toxic byproduct? And then how well am I clearing that thing to begin with, right? So between those 3 things, we end up with these 6 different types of women. And they're, again, come with their benefits, come with their problems. You've experienced both sides of that. And the hair loss, when you get to menopause age, it's the roller coaster, right? The hormones, you're no longer, the monthly cycle isn't what it used to be. And if you're androgen dominant, at the point of the beginning of your cycle is when you have the most testosterone and the least estrogen, right? It's a circadian rhythm. It's up and down. It's not the same way. And this is why so many women have challenges with women's supplements, women's hormones, because you're 7 different people within that month, right?
Yeah.
It's like this. It's not, and fertility time, testosterone goes way up to create that drive, right? Lining time, estrogen goes up to create, so it changes, right? So you need to change with it in terms of what you're doing. And this is where that's within the month. Now within your lifespan, it changes, puberty versus fertility age versus menopause age. You look very different in terms of what's going on at the biochemistry level. And that's where you experience that point where you reach that threshold where your body couldn't cope and the hair started to fall out.
Yeah.
Right. And tied to other things. And one thing that I commend you on, and I don't know how you did this, but your ability to metabolize fats and carbs, and it's so wacky, but somehow you maintain, and I just can't imagine how much work you put into.
Kashif, the truth is that I've, over the last 2 years, and coincidentally, it's when I started keto, that I've been gaining weight. And I hide it really well, but I'm 20 pounds heavier than my model weight, which is my ideal weight for working. And I didn't know what I was doing wrong. I don't eat carbs. I work out every day. And then, so when you came along and I had this test, it actually was so enlightening and inspiring, because I didn't know what else to do. I was kind of at the end of like, what am I supposed to eat? I can't eat anything. The truth is, you found out, and maybe you can speak to the science, but that I can't metabolize fats. And as you know, everyone knows keto is high in fat, and it's high in dairy, and I also can't metabolize dairy. So
and when you think about, that the current healthy plate with the avocados and the, all the fats and the coconut fats, etc., for you, it's not good. It doesn't work, right? And
No.
this is where that trial and error, people that are struggling with weight, that have whatever their goal is, trying to get there, it's challenging because you keep trying things that people say work, and ultimately something will work for you, but to get there is often a challenge, right? You may be lucky and hit it the first time, but often that's not the case. And this is where, personalization and knowing how you're wired, you have the answer off the bat. And if you had known earlier on, think about somebody who's on the keto diet that can metabolize fats beyond the weight. Think of the havoc you're wreaking internally in terms of, cholesterol, fat storage, etc., and organally, cardiovascularly. It goes far beyond just the aesthetics. And this is where ultimately, shifting your diet around, you've been able to do what your body actually needs. And that thing where keto diet makes fat melt away on a lot of people can have the complete opposite effect on others.
Yeah, it,
Right?
it actually did. And I'm very curious to see, I shared with you, privately, and I don't mind sharing it now, that I'm on blood pressure medication.
Right.
And I just attributed it to genetics. My family, they are predominantly overweight, and they have high blood pressure. So I just thought it's genetic,
Yeah.
I'm predisposed, but it's going to be really interesting over the next few months, because I just got my DNA results.
Right.
And I've changed my diet. I've gotten rid of the saturated fats and the high, the high protein. So it's going to be curious for me to see if I can get off of the blood pressure medication.
Yeah, and there's so many people that we've done this with, and this is where we say that the future of medicine isn't about treatment, right? The future of medicine shouldn't be about I wait to get sick and then do something about that thing that I'm feeling, right?
Yeah.
That symptom. Mask the symptom and I'm okay. When truly there's a system failure, there's something going on layers before that, and that's the nature of chronic disease. Chronic by nature means that it took years to develop. There was no switch that was flipped, right?
Yeah.
Blood pressure issue, this is why does it happen at this age? Why didn't it happen when you were 18? Right? Because it took that many years of making the wrong choices to reach that threshold where the system failed. And now you're feeling the symptom, right? And there was another thing we found, and when it comes to weight, people don't often look at the mind, right? And this is when we dove into your genetics, we found that serotonin, that mood regulator, that thing that's supposed to keep you in the middle, right? You're dysregulated, meaning that it's hard for you to sort of act or react as appropriate for the moment. You'll overreact, underreact, overexcited, underexcited, irritable, sitting in a meeting, what's that noise? I can't focus, right? That's serotonin dysregulation. But the healthcare implication of that is people that are dysregulated for serotonin, when they have that bad experience, the negative, the irritability, you tend to lean on food as a coping mechanism. Right? And you don't even know you're doing it. You perceive it as real because your body is just trying to bring you back to good, like a good state. I'm irritated. It's disrupting whatever I'm trying to do right now.
Yeah.
So let me do the thing that's easiest to create pleasure, which is food. Right?
Yeah.
And often, and this is where, again, I applaud you because in the work that you've done to be able to maintain, while having that challenge that people see as a habit or see as maybe greed or selfish or whatever you can label it as, it's literally an instruction in your brain saying, go eat food because you don't feel good right now.
Yeah. And I do binge on popcorn. I think, in my mind, it's healthy, right? You can tell yourself anything. But I don't have one bite of popcorn, I'll have the whole, and that was really interesting for you to look into my mind and tell me all these things that no one else knows,
Yeah. And this is where actually you bring up a really amazing point, because this is where the difference between binging and addiction, right? They're both forms of being dependent on some sort of substance or third party, but different ways about like how do I do that? What does that look like? And you're a binger. You're wired to binge. Why? Because you have the maximum expression of dopamine binding, meaning that sense of pleasure, that sense of reward, you experience it more than other people do. And why? Because when people deploy dopamine, like I ate something or I achieved something, dopamine is deployed, and you then bind it. There's a gene called DRD2, which determines how dense those binders are, and you have like the maximum density,
That
right?
is so fascinating because you know, I was also bulimic when I was younger, and you know, it's not something I talk about a lot, but it makes so much more sense now why I did things that I did in my past, you know?
Yeah.
And
So
not just maybe not just the pressure from the modeling industry, which I just thought it was, but it's actually I'm predisposed to that as well.
yeah, and this binging behavior is, it's hard for me to take interest or do, if I were to speak as if I had that, right? It's
Mm.
hard for me to take interest in things because I'm constantly satisfied. But when I find the thing that's important to me or creates reward or pleasure, I dive deep and I'm stuck in it. That's what binging is, right? So same thing, when you start to enjoy managing your body and how important it becomes to not gain that weight, and you see the needle move, yes, that would lead to things like bulimia, right? Because
Mhm.
all of a sudden you're so deep down that path, it's hard for you to manage it at a balanced level. And then your serotonin on top of that being dysregulated, you're seeing details that other people don't see, and every little notch of that needle affects you, right?
Mm.
And so if that is your focus, if that's the thing that's giving you pleasure or a sense of reward, which it probably was, like I feel rewarded when I'm not gaining weight or I'm losing weight,
Yeah.
you're going to go so deep down that path that you'll ultimately cause yourself a health problem. It's just, what path did you go down? I could have gone down a path of creating art and become the most incredible artist.
Mhm.
Yours was body type, and you saw it, your family around you, there was obesity, there was
Mhm.
cardiovascular issues, so it was a cognitive thing, like I need to manage this, right?
Mhm.
And you over managed it, which is what your brain type would typically do.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes me feel a bit better that I always felt it was weak, or, you know, like that I wasn't strong enough. But it maybe, you know, it just helps a lot, like psychologically, knowing that I was, I have this genetic, you know, predisposition to certain things, binging, and it's not all my fault, you know?
Yeah, and the key thing there is that it's not, so these types of things people often chalk up to exactly like you're saying, weakness, like, and the people around them also label it as that, right? Like,
Mhm.
well, you can't control yourself, oh, you're greedy or selfish or whatever the label is, right?
Yeah.
But if you know, if you have the context and you understand your wiring, your neural wiring,
Mhm.
not only are you informed and you understand, but it's also, it's a superpower. You unlock the superpower that you didn't realize was there, right? My ability to do the deep dive and focus and achieve to a level other people can't, and do the job better than anyone. So this is where understanding, it's not a diagnosis, it's not, hey, you have some rare disease, it's awareness of how your brain actually works, to be able to then understand why you make the choices you make, why you behave the way you behave, so that you can make better choices. And that's ultimately the outcome from understanding cognitive wiring.
Okay, so Kashif, how do I fix this serotonin issue?
So the funny thing is that with a lot of these things that express as what we call mental health issues, right? Not to say that there aren't mental health issues, for sure. We need, in fact, it's a crisis right now, especially post COVID. But there's certain elements that really aren't, call it disease, meaning it's something that you're stuck with that you need to treat, but they can be adjusted at the genetic level, and often with supplementation. If you go to any health food store, a Healthy Planet here in Toronto, and ask anyone, is there a supplement for balancing my serotonin? They'll give you multiple options,
Mhm.
right? It already exists. The question was, how did I know that's what I needed?
Mhm.
You know, and so there's certain people that are very tuned in, that read and learn, and you know, health and wellness is a focus, and so they're doing the right things. And but for the most part, again, we wait to get sick and then we treat it, and then we're only treating the thing we feel as opposed to why it's happening. And so
Mhm.
the first question is to understand, who am I? Well, how am I wired, and why is all this stuff happening? And this is for you, again, you know, there's literally simple supplements you take, balance that serotonin. That then dependency of I lean on food as a coping mechanism would go away,
Right.
right?
And is that the omega supplement?
So the actual supplement, like literally there's all these products that are called, serotonin regulators, for example, right? They're
Right.
in any health food store.
Okay.
The omega, what we find, it really helps with what's called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It's good for the heart, cardiovascular, but it upregulates BDNF, which is neuroplasticity. So it's repair of the brain. It's, circadian rhythm, my ability to sleep properly, my ability to deal with concussion. That's what omega is really good for. These things, there's, again, there's blood biomarkers that your doctors can test you for, and they'll say that this chemical is off, this chemical is off, but why is it off? That's the thing that we're missing.
How does the mitochondrial support help with my the high blood pressure?
This was one of the biggest red flags we found in your genetics, right?
Yeah.
This is where we said that at the mitochondrial level. So what is happening at the cell? A cell's job is to basically create energy and thrive. That's a cell's job. It takes nutrition from your food, and it takes oxygen from the air, and it creates energy.
Mm-hmm.
That's what a cell is meant to do. All of your 4 trillion plus cells in your body. In that process, taking oxygen in and creating energy, you produce what's called an oxidant, right? So it's a toxin, a free radical.
Mm.
So the same thing that gives you life and keeps you alive is slowly aging you and killing you.
Mm.
So what's meant to happen is at the mitochondria level, the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. That's where this activity actually happens, creating energy. And within that powerhouse, there's a battery. It's called ATP. That's where you store the energy. So for some people, they do this process quite efficiently. I take oxygen and I take food, and I create energy that I then live off of and thrive. And for some people, that last step of that oxidant, that soot or smoke that's created from burning fuel, just like if I were to burn gas or any other fuel, it doesn't clear, right? And one of the biggest red flags we found in your genetics was that you do this at the worst possible level, right? So what does that lead to? That leads to your cells are under constant stress of this, that soot, that smoke, that byproduct, the oxidants that are sitting at the cellular level and not being cleared. What's meant to happen, get rid of it, put it into blood, send it to the liver, metabolize it, get rid of it. Your liver is your detox system, right? Yours just sits at the cell. It's like a load, right? Now, if you take on top of that, what were you doing? Was I doing heavy cardiovascular exercise, which I think you were, right? Yeah. Which means that I'm doing even more of this, taking oxygen, burning this battery now. I'm no longer just using the energy in my blood, but my output is so high that I now need to burn that ATP, that battery, that store of fuel, which is producing even more of this oxidant, this soot, this smoke. If you layer on top of that, we looked at your genetics, you don't detoxify so well.
Right.
So you're creating all this stuff that you don't clear, just sitting there, and the little of it that actually gets into the blood to actually get rid of, you don't get rid of it. So now the question can be, you take this exact same genetic profile, put someone on a beach somewhere where they just live off the sea and eat fish and have no stress, and they may never get sick because there's no load on the cell, right? Take that same genetic profile, give them your lifestyle, which is high-paced, in the city with pollution, quick, fast meals, like I'm trying to do what I can to move around, high-paced, stress, lack of sleep, load on top of I can't clear what I'm doing. And on the biggest red flag I would say is the cardiovascular exercise, where you're actually creating that more flow of oxygen into oxidant. What does this do? Rapid aging. The cells, what the definition of aging is, literally the sort of damage to your DNA, your cells slowly having that stress that leads to aging at the cellular level, which is why people's hair turns white, which is why the skin starts to sag, which is why you see a marathon runner who seemingly would think is very healthy because all they do is exercise. Meanwhile, when you look at a marathon runner, what do you typically see? The skin is like wrinkled. It's kind of, this old, abused look because they've put so much oxidative stress on their cells from this process we've talked about, right? So that was the risk for you. And the emergency is we need to get into your cells and clear that stuff, right? Because you're now at the age, 50 is the time where all this stuff starts to translate into disease. It's unfortunate, but 50 50% of North Americans have a chronic disease by the age of 50.
Wow.
An even greater number will have 2 chronic diseases by the age of 60.
Oh.
It is expected, it's taken for granted that we spend the last 15 years of our life in treatment for some kind of disease. That is the expectation. Why? Because you do this for 50 years and eventually the body will give up. What disease is just depending on which cells you had the most load and the least capability. And this is where, if I say one more thing, the risk for you there was, remember when we dove into your cellular structure, where did you have weak cellular structure? Was in the arteries, at the endothelial lining, right? So in your arteries, this tube that the blood flows through, most heart disease doesn't happen in the heart. It happens in the arteries, that cholesterol, plaque buildup, calcification, all those types of things. The inner tube where the blood actually flows through and touches is called the endothelial lining. It's a very thin cell membrane, which is what the blood actually touches. Genetically, we predetermine that you have the weak version of that. That cellular structure isn't so good, right? Which means mitochondria not so good. You're maintaining this load of that soot, that smoke in the cells. You're not getting rid of it. Of the little you do get rid of, it doesn't clear the blood so well because your detox isn't that great. Where are you going to have stress? Which cells are going to fail first? Endothelial, because we already know that they're not the best, right?
Yeah.
Now, the good news is you're not there yet. You're not experiencing, other than the blood pressure, which we're also going to deal with, you're not there yet. It's not cholesterolemia. It's not plaque buildup. You're not on a Lipitor or a statin drug. In understanding all of this, we can do something that's not treatment, which is not treat the disease. We can do what's called disease reversal, right? I can literally, and I'm not saying me personally, but I mean we as a population, chronic diseases, we can reverse. You can prevent if you're early enough, but you can also reverse. And it's interesting that the pressure, the social pressure is so high now that the powers that be can't deny it anymore. So the Center for Disease Control in the United States has actually created a diabetes disease reversal program now that they're sort of employing, that clinicians should adopt, right? And this is the first time that the chronic disease has been looked in this way, that we can actually reverse something as opposed to treat it, because the evidence is just insurmountable and undeniable, and they just can't put it aside anymore. Anyways, long story short, this is the thing that we're going to work with you on for the next few months. And what would be great is to come back and to talk about why you look 10 years younger and feel 15 years younger, not to say that you already look, nobody would ever guess your age, but it can always be better. Right.
And you don't think that the damage is irreversible? What I did with my keto diet and eating that high fat, you think I can clear that? What I've done to them on a cellular level with my...
Yeah, and this is the thing with the fat. One thing we know about fat is people transform their bodies all the time. Right? You know better than anyone. At Hollywood, it's like, look at somebody like Mark Wahlberg's fit for a movie, and then he's like obese for some other film, so that part is, I shouldn't say easy, but manageable. When you've done damage at the cellular level, there's some degree that's going to stick, but the whole goal is to keep it under the threshold where disease is expressing. 50 years of damage, yes, damage has been done, but if you're not going to get sick, it really doesn't matter. Right? You may not be optimal and the most efficient you could be, but you're not going to be sick either. And that's the goal. This is the journey that we're going to go through on, which I'm excited to work with you on, is let's get rid of that blood pressure issue. Let's make sure you don't ever get sick. In terms of cardiovascular, etc. So yeah, so short answer, there's damage done. As long as you're not crossing that threshold where it's turning into disease, it really doesn't matter. And that's the goal. Let's keep you out of disease. And for those of us that are suffering disease, let's reverse it. Chronic disease. There's things that, are genetic. You're going to have them, and there's not much that can be done about that other than treatment or waiting for some genetic therapeutic that may come one day. There's acute, I broke my arm. Yeah, you got to go to the hospital and fix it. Chronic disease, it's a choice.
Got it.
So if if this tool was given to you, and which it was, and like you could do anything with it, and you were to apply this to that unique population that you dealt with, that sort of supermodel world, that high-paced fashion world, what would be that magic thing that you would want to draw out of it that you think everybody needs?
Well, I really wish that I had known or been given this information when I was modeling, because I suffered so many years, trying to fit into this model body, and I was going through. I was only given the guidance that I should be skinny, but not how to do it. I was eating all the wrong things and suffering greatly mentally as well. And I really wish that that I had been given these tools to understand my body and how it works, and a paleo diet is best for me, and it's not starving myself, and all of these things I went through. I really I wish I had this information when I was so much younger.
Yeah, I can imagine the impact of, like you said, the business is how do I stay skinny, and the routes to get there probably aren't the healthiest, right?
No.
And if you actually knew how your body does that, it could be done in a very healthy way. And if you think, go beyond modeling, but just every young girl that has these pressures, every young boy that's in high school that's trying to fit into, it's an age where this pressure just exists, and we know it exists, right?
Yeah.
And the choices that are being made are not healthy, and
Right.
for the wrong reasons. And just imagine if parents could inform and empower their kids with what actually gets them to their goals, so that it relieves that pressure, right? And it allows them to be healthy and still get what they want. And so it crosses over beyond the profession to just general, everybody needs to know this.
Right. And there is so much suffering with body image these days, more so now than ever, because of the internet and social media and retouched images. People, no one has a real clear sense of what a healthy body image is anymore, and so that's unfortunate. But this tool is amazing for people that want to know how to be their healthiest, how to be their most fit. I'm really excited now when I eat, when I take care of myself. Now I know that I'm actually on the right path. And whereas before I just thought, I don't know what to do. I kind of give up. And I'm really excited about this new chapter in my life. I feel more excited about being 50 now in a few days than ever before.
That's amazing. And we would love to continue going on this journey with you, which we're going to, and work on not only those things, but some of the healthcare issues. And I'm sure listeners would love to hear in a month or so from now how things are going and the changes that have been made. You can really inspire a lot of people with the work you're doing. And it's awesome that you're doing this for yourself and for your family, just to be healthy. And we would love to talk to you again, in a month or so, and just see how it's going and let people know.
Sure, sounds good. I can't wait to check back in.
Thank you for opening up and talking about your personal issues, especially the fertility one. I know that's a touchy subject, but it really helps people understand that things can be a lot better.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I'm happy to share to save some other people some of the heartache. So thank you for having me on.
And Monika, if anyone wants to get in touch with you, hear about your story, I'm not sure if you're going to be sharing it on social, but what are you up to these days, and how can people find you?
Well, I'm on Instagram mostly, and I'm working on some exciting new projects, some skincare, hair care coming soon.
Awesome. Thank you again for opening up and sharing. And as I'm sure people will follow your story as we get through this online, and look forward to talking to you again.
From the DNA Company, this has been the Unpilled Podcast with your host, Kashif Khan. Thanks for listening.